Does it appear to be true that we need to have changes in order for our body to continue to change and grow? And I know some people are, they're like, oh, the muscle confusion stuff is BS or whatever, but I'm not really talking about, changing the exercises real drastically or anything like that. But there's changes in like tempo, to the exercise, changes in rest periods, changes into frequency. Like there's a lot of different changes that we can make. So what have you seen in your research? Does it appear that over a long period of time that we need to make some changes? And if so, how often should we be looking into making changes?
That's a great question. So here's what I would say. If you want to look at it just from a fundamental standpoint, the body adapts to a stimulus because of survival. Our bodies don't care about looking jacked in a tank top or a woman in a bikini.
Damn it.
All the body cares about is survival. And that is a stimulus. If you keep giving the body the same stimulus, it doesn't have any impetus to adapt. So just based on that concept, it just logically follows that some type of change over time is necessary. And yes, so has there been any concrete research that's been done that gives us insights? Not really. I do think we actually carried out a study on the quote unquote muscle confusion concept, where basically an app just gave random workouts in each day, and it actually had somewhat negative effects. But that's not smart training. So, I wouldn't take out of that variety isn't good, and I would say variety is good. The question then becomes, how often should you change? There's no cookie cutter answers to that. I do think from an exercise standpoint, my own personal belief is that we should maintain certain core exercises, particularly those that are more difficult to complete. So that have more complex movement patterns. So if you're going to do a squat, you'd want to keep that in your routine. If you're not going to do a squat, then that's fine. But things like squats and rows and presses, there's technique aspects that if you do them once every 3 months, you're just not going to be efficient in that movement pattern. It's going to hinder your ability to get the most out of that exercise. So you'd want to keep that in your routine, at least on a weekly basis, if not bi-weekly basis over time. Whereas if you're doing a machine, I could get on a chest press, a hammer strength chest press, and not do it for 3 months and do the exact same form perfectly as I did 3 months ago. So I think there is where you can start to achieve novel stimuli through exercise selection. When it comes to other variables, again, like you're talking tempo, I'm not huge on manipulating tempo. I'm not saying there might not be something to that, but I'm more a believer in mind-muscle connection and letting that dictate tempo and just really getting a feel for the movement rather than trying to say, I'm going to do 2 seconds up versus 4 seconds up, and then controlling the negative. But other things like volume, I believe in periodizing. Here's another important concept that I think often goes unspoken, that the body is extremely resilient for short periods of time. We can adapt and thrive when we are hit with a very potent stressor over short periods. But if you continue that stressor over longer periods of time, ultimately we break down. So if you're, let's say, going through a bad relationship with your girlfriend and you're fighting all the time, you can adapt, you could thrive for that for short periods of time. If that happens over 6 months, you're not going to be doing too well in general. And exercise is a stressor. So that's obviously somewhat of a out of context example, but it does have a stress is a stress in when it comes down to it. They're all stressors. And really, if we're looking at, let's say, volume, which is a stressor, if you're going to do higher volumes, if you're going to do high volumes over months at a time, ultimately it's going to cause you to break down. Everyone's going to have different abilities to recuperate from that volume, but it just makes logical sense that having some type of periodized strategy where you're going from somewhat lower volume to somewhat higher volume, and you ultimately peak at a given volume, then come back to a lower volume to reset or resensitize your body, just makes logical sense.
Can you define volume and intensity for us in case the listeners are like, man, he keeps mentioning that word, I got no idea what's going on?
Yeah, so volume is, there's several ways we can look at volume, but volume generally is sets per muscle. and usually per week. So let's say you're going to do 10 sets of your of chest exercise per week. Your volume would be 10 sets. If you're going to do 20 sets, it would be 20 sets per week. There's other ways to look at volume. We can look at repetition volume. So if you're doing sets of 20 versus sets of 10, your repetition volume is going to be higher for the sets of 20 than it is for 10. If you can also look at volume load, which I mentioned before, where we take the load into play, where you have to then multiply the repetitions by the amount of load that you're using, and that's a function of the work that you're carrying out. From a bodybuilding standpoint, the most researched and generally the way that the bros have been looking at it over the years has been through sets per muscle per week. So that's kind of my default in that context. And intensity is how hard you're training. You can look at intensity of load, like percentage of 1 RM, but when I'm referring to intensity, I'm referring to the intensity of load, so how hard you're physically working out.